It's really a great privilege today to be chairing this esteemed panel and side event to the Human Rights Council 46th session, co-hosted by Human Rights Watch, to discuss the 4th of August Beirut explosion and the current Lebanese investigation. But most importantly today, we're joined by Sarah, Paul, Tracy and Nurey, victims of the explosion, and parents of Isaac, Alexandra and Elias, 3 of the children who were tragically killed by the explosion. It's an honour to host you. Also on the panel today, I'm delighted to welcome Ambassador Ralph Taraf, Ambassador of the EU to Lebanon, Najat Roshdi, UN Deputy Special Coordinator, Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Lebanon, Kenneth Roth, Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, Agnes Kalamar, UN Special Rapporteur and Extrajudicial Summary on Arbitrary Executions, and Nada Abdel Satter, Managing Partner of Access Law and International Lawyer. In the days and weeks following the 4th of August, it became clear that the explosion itself, as well as the extent of the human cost and damage, could have been completely avoided. We're here today because survivors and victims want to find the truth, what happened. And they're no closer to that than they were really on the 4th of August. We're told by the victims and survivors that the most important thing for them is to establish the truth, to know what happened that day, to commemorate their loved ones, and accountability for the lives lost and the damage caused to so many families. So how can we ensure that victims and survivors get the justice that they deserve?
The blast was, from what we know now, at best, the result of criminal negligence and mismanagement of public affairs, defying the most basic standards. I think it is appropriate to deal with this issue here, in the margins of the Human Rights Council. But beyond the killing and the violence, the culture of impunity permeates the whole system in Lebanon. We know of bad governance, corruption, mismanagement of public assets. The second element of the context in Lebanon is the lack of separation of powers, with the executive, judicial and legislative branches of power not checking on each other, but basically supporting each other. Given that context, as I said, I understand the call for international investigations.
I just want to start by saying thank you to you, Antonia, and to Legal Action Worldwide and to Human Rights Watch for hosting this incredibly important discussion. Before I get to the heart of your question, I want to start by telling you a little bit about Isaac, what happened to him, and the impact that his death has had on our family. At 2 years old, Isaac was the youngest victim of the Beirut blast. He was an outgoing, confident, brave, and incredibly intelligent and affectionate little boy. He was thriving in Beirut. He loved to talk to people, and as we walked around the city, he would wave at the locals, many of them who would stop and chat with him, which he loved. He constantly astounded my husband and I with his fierce intelligence. He was a master at puzzles, and he was quickly picking up Arabic and French, despite the fact that my husband and I are fluent in neither. He loved cats, lizards, and butterflies, which he called butterlowers, and we spent many happy hours at a garden near our apartment searching for all 3. But above all, Isaac was loving and affectionate, and I feel a physical pain at the thought that I'll never get to hug him again. Now let me tell you about how this beautiful little boy was killed. Isaac was sitting in his high chair having dinner at home, at the place where he should have felt most safe, singing along to his favorite nursery rhymes when the explosion hit. I was thrown to the ground, but Isaac in his high chair was like a sitting target. A large piece of glass pierced his tiny chest. Not knowing what happened, my husband and I raced to get help, but the closest hospital, St. George, had been destroyed in the blast. A good Samaritan who I flagged down on the street raced us to Rafiq Hariri Hospital, where Isaac died shortly afterwards. The glass had pierced his heart and his lungs, and he died of massive internal bleeding and cardiac arrest. I was almost 7 months pregnant at the time, and we were 3 weeks away from leaving Lebanon to return to Australia to have the baby. Instead of taking Isaac home to see his grandparents and his cousins and to meet his new baby brother, we had to accompany his casket back to Australia. I've struggled to come to terms with what happened to Isaac, not only because losing a child is the worst pain imaginable, but also because of how it happened. It is incomprehensible to me that my son was killed in the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. In addition to losing our son, we lost our home, our belongings, our future, and our sense of security. I suffer anxiety and flashbacks. Loud sounds leave me paralyzed in fear. The sounds of children squealing bring back the blood-curdling screams that filled the hospital that night. And a quiet moment brings to mind my last image of Isaac's face, scared and confused. I now have my newborn son, Ethan, and I find it impossible to lose myself in the joy of being a mother again because everything reminds me of Isaac and what I've lost, and that is so unfair to Ethan. The death of a child also brings with it an enormous amount of guilt. My husband and I have questioned every little thing we did in the aftermath of the explosion, as well as every decision that we took, big and small, in the lead up to the explosion. I repeatedly asked myself, why did I take up my job at the United Nations in Lebanon? Why did we pick that apartment? Why did we put his high chair in that part of the room? Why, when the blast occurred, was I standing next to Isaac and not in front of him where my body could have shielded his? But these and many more decisions I question should not have been life and death decisions. I shouldn't have been put in a position where I feel guilty about the fact that if I'd been standing one step to the right, my son might be here today. I can tell you what were life and death decisions. The decision on behalf of multiple authorities to do nothing about the ammonium nitrate stored unsafely in a residential area despite clear warnings that it posed a threat to the city. The decision authorities took to not warn the people of Beirut of the danger when the fire at the port broke out. A simple warning to stay away from windows could have saved countless lives, including Isaac's. And the decision not to provide guidance to the population on which hospitals were destroyed and which could accept patients, meaning people wasted precious minutes and hours trying to seek medical care. These were life and death decisions taken on behalf of the authorities, and in each case they made the wrong one, knowing that they were putting innocent lives at risk. People have called the explosion an accident, but my husband and I say that Isaac was murdered because negligence on this scale is absolutely criminal. After the explosion, I felt so defeated and so beaten down that I could not see a path to justice. I recall telling my husband in those early days that we will never see justice for Isaac, so it's probably not worth fighting for. How do you even begin to hope that those with the power and resources to cover their tracks will be held accountable? I knew that decades of United Nations reporting has shown that the Lebanese justice system lacks independence, is inefficient, lacks necessary resources, and is weak to corrupt practices. Why should I expect that to change now, particularly when it is well known that senior officials, all the way up to the president, knew that the ammonium nitrate was there and knew that it posed a threat to the city? While I initially felt the fight for justice was pointless, over time I've come to realize that if I don't take up this fight, it is essentially saying that what happened to Isaac and what happened to Alexandra and to Elias and to all the other victims doesn't matter, and that their lives had no value. My son loved life. To watch this world through his eyes was pure joy. And yet one of his last sights in the world before he lost consciousness was of me, his mother, the person he always turned to for comfort, drenched in blood, glass embedded in my face and screaming for help. His last feeling in this world was of intense pain, and make no mistake, Isaac died a painful death. And that is not okay. And what happened to Isaac is not right. He deserved more from this world, and if we do not fight for justice, we are essentially saying that what happened to this 2-year-old innocent child being brutally killed in his home doesn't matter. But it does matter. I want those responsible for his death to know his name, to know his face, and I hope what happened to him haunts their dreams. Now, unfortunately, my fears about the Lebanese justice system are bearing fruit. We have all seen the delays, the due process violations, the political leaders' attempts to stop the investigation, and other political interference. Now, let me tell you what it's like from a victim's perspective. In the 7 months since Isaac was killed, not a single person in authority has contacted my husband and I to express their condolences. Not a single person has contacted us to inform us of our rights, of the investigation process or to take a witness statement. It's like we do not exist, and this is not acceptable. It's for this reason that I believe an independent and impartial fact-finding mission is the only way forward. Now, I've worked for both the International Criminal Court and the United Nations, and I know that the international system of justice has its flaws and challenges. But I also know that when there is a political will and when the members of the international community work together, positive changes as well as justice and accountability can be achieved. So my question to the international community is this: are you going to confirm my initial fears that there is no path to justice for my son Isaac? Or are you going to recognize that his life had value, that he deserved a chance at life, and that was taken from him, not by accident, but by criminal negligence? Are you going to stand up and say what happened to him and all the other victims was wrong and they deserve justice? Now, are you going to take up the cause on his behalf? Thank you.
Now, for far too long, the international community has given the benefit of the doubt to the Lebanese government, crediting its vows that the explosion would be investigated vigorously and expeditiously. Instead, what we've seen is obstruction, evasion, and delay. But he charged 37 people, 25 of whom have been detained under conditions that appear to violate their due process rights. With the exception of the heads of the Customs Administration and the Port Authority, those detained are mostly mid to low-level customs, port, and security officials, as well as employees of a maintenance company that just happened to be there, contracted to do some work on the warehouse when the 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate were stored. Now, the families of those detained, as well as their lawyers, say that all of the people in detention have been charged with basically the same litany of crimes, despite their very different roles. The crimes include, foremost, homicide with probable intent. That is the claim that the accused foresaw the occurrence of the crime and accepted the risk of its occurrence. Other alleged crimes are unintentional homicide, causing an explosion, storing dangerous goods, disrupting the security of the port and the country, and polluting the environment. Now, most of the suspects have only had an initial interrogation with the investigating judge at the time of arrest. Lawyers said that the judge did not tell them or their clients which of the many charges even applied to them, or provide any individualized evidence against them, ostensibly again because of the secrecy of the investigations. Despite the relatively low level of the people detained, senior officials knew of the ammonium nitrate being stored in the port. Indeed, both Lebanese President Aoun and Prime Minister Hissam Diab admitted that they knew as much. But when Judge Sawan wrote to the parliament in November asking for an investigation of some 9 or 10 current and former ministers, the Speaker of the Parliament, a very powerful figure, refused to act. The Lebanese justice system was given its chance to address the blast, and it failed miserably.
In a joint statement issued on 13th of August, 38 independent human rights experts of the UN Human Rights Council called for a prompt, impartial, credible, and independent investigation based on human rights principles. Some have argued that the usual practice of exerting political pressure and interference will prevent the legal and judicial system from achieving justice and ensuring the rights of victims to truth, justice, and remedy. However, even in those cases where member states have requested the UN to set up independent commissions of inquiry, these cannot substitute in any way the national systems. So eventually, national justice systems need to take things in control and deliver justice and effective remedies to the victims and their families.
As Antonia has mentioned, I'm Mireille Khoury, the mother of Elias, the young man with angelic smile who left this world due to the explosion on August 4th. I didn't know on the morning of August 4th that this would be the last day I hug my son, smell his hair, prepare his meal, listen to his voice calling me mom, or listen to his giggles and chats with his friends. Discuss preparations for his SAT exam, or discuss his dreams in general, and talk about his rap hobby. I didn't know that morning that since that day, I will spend my whole life mourning. I'm a dedicated and protective mother. My whole life rotates around my children, Elias and Noor, a 21-year-old pre-med student. We were in our home, abiding by the lockdown rules, and Elias was in his room, the place which is supposed to be the safest. I had no idea that someone in authority has decided back in 2014 to store explosive material 200 meters away from my house, 200 meters away from a residential area, near a highway where thousands of people commute daily and in the main port of the country. I had no idea that someone in authority has accepted to store these materials, and that since that day, all the persons in authority who took over from 2014 till 2020 did nothing to take these materials away or destroy them, or even to warn us. I would have taken my children away and my son would have been alive. Even in the last 20 minutes, which is the time or the duration between the eruption of the fire and the explosion, all people in authority who knew about the nitrate, and there are many, could have just sent an SMS, or in any way they could have warned the people in the area. They could have saved many victims, and Isaac, Alex, and Elias would have been alive now. On that day, my house and the essence and meaning of my life were destroyed. The walls and windows fell all over us. The walls of my son's room fell on his head and his body. My back was badly injured with fractures, in addition to other injuries. But believe me, I didn't feel any pain. My main pain was my concern for my children. My daughter had injuries in her arms, hand, and face. She lost the partial functioning of her pinky finger, in addition to part of her eyelid. My son was transferred with my husband to the hospital in a civilian car. My daughter and I went to hospital on motorbikes, and each one in a different motorbike and to a different hospital. I will not go into the details given the time constraint, but the journey to the hospital by itself is a trauma beyond expression. The details are all in the report that was submitted by LAW back in November. I still wake up every night and ask myself if this has really happened or was it just a nightmare. And I see my daughter crying every night, missing her only brother. My husband is in total denial. My daughter has gone through many surgeries and she still needs a couple or more. We wonder, how can we continue living without Elias? I feel as if my heart has been taken out of my body and that there is a big hole inside and that I'm a dead person, living just because I'm stuck in life and just because I have to continue for my daughter's sake. After 7 months, we still do not know the truth, and we have no clue that justice will ever be served. Based on what has happened so far with the investigation, and based on the track record whereby no case of such scale has ever been resolved in Lebanon, the previous judge was replaced for no convincing reasons, and directly after calling high-caliber politicians for investigation. Will they allow any judge to call for high-level politicians for investigation? Will they allow the people who are truly responsible be convicted? I appeal to the international community to help us in any way they can to achieve justice, whether by fact-finding mission, independent investigation, or in any other way that I might not know of. Also, please, for the sake of the young generation, for the sake of my son's friends, to regain trust in justice. For the sake of his friends who carried Ilyas in his coffin instead of dreaming and partying together. Help us to prove to them that the Convention of Human Rights and the child rights which they have studied in school are not just ink on paper. Thank you.
Lebanon has a duty to take active measures to prevent the exposure of individuals and communities to further toxic substances. It also must provide everyone made homeless by the explosion with suitable accommodation on an emergency and then longer-term basis. Lebanon also has an obligation to investigate conduct that negatively impacts on the enjoyment of the right to life and other rights, to punish those responsible of any violation of such rights, and to offer effective remedies to the victims or their families.
The victims that I advise, the group of victims that I advised, are seeking independent international support from the international community, and I will be more specific in a while. They are seeking support from the international community because they have completely lost any hope in the Lebanese system. What they want is truth, justice, punishment, accountability, and recognition for their sufferings and healing. If injustice and impunity becomes the real culture that the international community would like to turn a blind eye on, I think that you will all agree with me that the United Nations itself will have no reason to exist. If the international community thinks that the Lebanese authorities are doing a good job, fine. But I haven't heard anyone stating that. So what we really demand in the name of the victims is either to support the Lebanese judiciary to reach justice by sending, for example, an independent fact-finding mission, by putting a competent team experienced enough of independent, not necessarily international, of independent, credible, transparent investigators that would come and serve and assist the Lebanese expertise and the Lebanese investigation. This would be a step in the right direction. It's an implicit acceptance that it is okay to kill 220 persons in Lebanon. It's okay to injure more than a few thousand people in Lebanon. It's fine to have hundreds of thousands displaced because this happened in Lebanon, so it's fine. Can you imagine how the entire Lebanese population would feel?
Thank you, Antonia. Thank you, Legal Action Worldwide. Thank you, Human Rights Watch. Thank you, Ambassador Taraf and the UN for listening to us. We're not used to this in this country. Anyway, let's go back to the 4th of August. I'm going to go back to a few days after the 4th of August. I think it's important to highlight this impunity that we are all talking about, this recklessness, this lack of recognition, and the lack of our rights all. So a few days after the blast, the president, the Lebanese president, proudly goes on national TV and states, "I knew about the nitrate d'ammonium, but c'était trop tard," meaning it was late. Late for what? I don't know. This president was an ex-commander of the army, so he knew what was the effects and the danger of the ammonium nitrate that was in the port. A few days later, the ex-prime minister states, proudly on national TV as well, I received the report about this, but hadn't time to read it, so I didn't know about the danger of this ammonium. Fine. The Minister of Health, a few weeks later, states people that died on the 4th of August were destined to die, and it goes on. Anyway, so on the 4th of August, there was a fire burning in the port for 40 minutes. Yet, we know now that they knew, but no one took a minute to inform the people, to take cover, to open windows, to hide, to cover their children, you know. 6:07, the explosion happens. The criminals killed us in our own house. My husband carried my daughter. He was injured and covered with blood. I had 4 broken ribs, 3 broken vertebrae, an injured lung, and it goes on. We went down to the roads, trying to reach for help, trying to get to the hospital. The press was there, I remember, and I saw some footage of myself going out of the building. Yet, there were no army, no security force, no one helping people, no one opening roads to facilitate access to the hospitals. Nobody. There were people helping people. After the 4th of August, the government was generous enough to give us 1 mourning day for more than 220 victims, 1 mourning day. Until now, no Memorial Day, nothing. On the 7th of August, my daughter died. On the 8th of August, we buried her. In the morning, in the afternoon, Paul and I were already doing interviews. No time for mourning, because we anticipated, knowing the history of our government, that they will not move, that we'll have to fight to gain justice. And we couldn't be able to take just 1 day to rest, to think about what happened, to think about Alexandra. Until today, every day we wake up. I cry for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, not more, because I have to be strong and to think about and plan the day that will help us and help other victims gain justice and gain the right to live in this country. It's the first time that I hear Mireille or Sarah talk about what they felt on this day. I talk to Mireille and Sarah 2 to 3 times a week, and we never talked about what happened. We are three mothers and a father that lived the same tragedy. We should be talking with each other to lift each other up, you know, to help each other. And yet we never did this because we have to talk about justice, planning justice, and how to fight this corrupted criminal government. No action were taken to support the people, whether psychologically or provide them food or housing. Once again, it was people helping people. But the biggest problem is security. People feel unsecured. We have 500 tons of ammonium that exploded, yet we know that there are 2,000 missing. How do we know where are the 2,000 missing? Are they next door? Are they in Beirut? Will something else happen? We don't know. Nobody told us. And 220 people have been killed on this day. But people are still dying 7 months later from this big tragedy. I'm gonna talk about 2 examples. Maggie Jaidini, who was 87 years old, died a month ago. Quoting her daughter, on the 4th of August, she lost her house. So she lived at my place for a while. So she lost all of her bearings and didn't want to live anymore. She died 6 months later. Ardem Nenedjian, a 57-year-old man that died a few days ago, had his house destroyed, his business and his business destroyed. He was traumatized. He stopped eating, then he stopped talking, then he stopped walking, and a few days ago he stopped breathing because of loneliness, insecurity, and lack of empathy. So, do I believe in Lebanese justice? How can I believe in Lebanese justice? When based on all I said, it's controlled by people with complete disregard of basic human rights. And with the lack of time, I'll let Paul proceed.
So I'll answer on the question was about trusting the Lebanese justice system, and as Tracy just mentioned, trusting a justice system would be trusting a government, an establishment that values basic human rights, which is something that we have been suffering from for so long. But it is also about justice is not a given. Justice is trusted. It's something that needs legitimacy, and it is very important for us today to mention that as competent as the judges could be, the Beirut Bar Association could be, trusting this system would mean the justice system in Lebanon means trusting this establishment, which is absolutely not independent. The justice is controlled today by a failed and implicated establishment in this affair. It is a truth today that based on investigation done by journalism, unfortunately, because we have to rely on media for that this establishment was paramount in facilitating the transportation of the ammonium nitrate from European countries to Syria, because back in the time, 2013, 2014, war was waging nearby, and ammonium nitrate was being used as explosives in barracks. So what, answering this question, Antonia, means asking for it's as if we would be asking a criminal to incriminate himself. Thankfully, this is something that has never happened before. In the aftermath of the Second World War, we did not ask the Nazis to incriminate themselves for the crimes and the atrocity committed in the genocide against the Jews. This would be exactly doing the same. So, of course, we don't trust it. And in fact, I'll argument just a bit with a few elements. First of all, history proves it. The Lebanese justice system was never successfully able to incriminate all of the crimes that happened, and particularly since 2005, with the assassination of Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. North of 20 assassinations or assassination attempts had happened, with none of them being able to reach justice. So we need to be factual. This has never happened before. So why now? Moreover, there is no endorsement whatsoever by this establishment to this case, and a lack of seriousness, an absolute lack of seriousness in it. Why are we here now? Why are we alone? Where are the members of parliament that are supposed to represent us as a people? Why aren't they here? Where were the ministers and the responsibles of the armies and the foreign and the ex-prime minister when they were convicted and they were asked to go to justice, and they completely disregarded it. When we should expect in a normal country, if this has happened in Europe or in the US or whatever in the world, you would expect that your members of parliament would be asking for this and pushing for it every single day, which is absolutely not happening. How can we trust a justice system that is completely mismanaging, technically speaking, this case? Can you imagine, with the enormity of this atrocity, that there is only one judge that has been appointed to manage this case? In France, there are two families that are pursuing justice there, and one judge was appointed per family. We are talking about an international case with international implications, and nevertheless, one judge is appointed with no competencies and supporting capabilities whatsoever. How can we trust a country where there is no witness protection whatsoever, that has witnessed the killing of very important witnesses or people with intel that would have helped with pursuing the investigation? From the belated Lokman Slim, most recently, to Joe Bejani, who had photographs of what happened, of the hangars, or at least images of what would help in the investigation, that was killed in front of his children. How can we trust a country where such a case is being systematically infiltrated politically, and where politicians are doing everything in their power to put hurdles in the investigation, where the principal judge for this affair tried to work for 6 months and then was removed for ridiculous reasons, which were mentioned by Ken earlier, such as him being being biased because he was harmed by the blast. Thank God that they realized 6 months after, as if they didn't know before. And Antonia, even if we were able to gain justice in Lebanon, we know for a fact that it will not be executed, because it's not just about getting the truth out and getting the right people convicted. It's about the execution of justice, which again has never happened in this country. A country where the establishment is corrupt to the bone, where even the international aid that is being sent to us as families of victims is being robbed nowhere less than 70%, because of the money and the funds having to pass by the governmental institutions. And they are profiting from the duality in the currency exchange rates between the official rates and the black market rates to steal it from us. What I would just like to say in conclusion, that again, trusting justice is not a given. In Lebanon, if we were to trust it, is as if we were trusting a failed state. We heard earlier in this panel that the United Nations, the EU wanted to, were calling and pushing, and as Nada was mentioning before, trying to empower the country to make reforms. We didn't ask the Nazis to reform themselves. We pushed them and took them to justice. This has to stop. We cannot ask reforms from an establishment that has worked for years before in absolute impunity, total recklessness, total disregard for basic human rights and freedom to live, and inhumanity in everything that it implies, and systemic corruption. We cannot ask them to fix themselves. You would not ask a criminal, please don't make it again, please stop being a criminal. I would nicely ask you to behave yourself. We have to stop kidding ourselves. We have to stop asking for the same people to come back in government. We can't, it's an insult for us to hear that Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who has been involved in everything for so long, is being asked by the international community again to form a government. This is an insult to us, an insult to all the victims, and an insult to all of Lebanon. On the 7th of August, my daughter was still fighting for her life, despite her frail body and the tremendous shock that she took in from a near nuclear explosion. She died on the night of the 7th, and a few minutes before she passed, Tracy was asking her, begging her to be the miracle that we needed as victims and that this country needs. And unfortunately, it did not happen. I have a feeling that today this is the turning point, could be the turning point of what we were expecting that day. That the Human Rights Council has been established at the very beginning and in its initial vision to be the go-to body for people like us and the families and the country as a whole, to ask for justice when it has been oppressed for so long and when we have no other avenue. And we put our trust in you, and we put our trust in the HRC. And we are going to be fighting until the end. Sorry, it was a bit long. Thanks, Antonio.
If I can recommend anything, I would recommend to pursue all avenues in parallel and simultaneously. I think what we need is a place to mourn in Lebanon and to honor the dead. A question of memorial has been raised, and we have been looking into it, whether we cannot support it. I hear your plea for the Human Rights Council to act in view of a blocked Security Council. Yes, we need to go for it. We need to build and to improve the judicial system in Lebanon, no matter what. This is a professional obligation which I have.
The International Criminal Court does not have jurisdiction. Lebanon is not a party to the Rome Statute. And the only way that the court could get jurisdiction would be if the UN Security Council referred Lebanon to the court, which it's not going to do for the same reasons that it's not going to authorize its own investigation. You know, between China and Russia, they're dead set against any kind of accountability.
The international community cannot level itself to the Lebanese justice. We need to lift the Lebanese justice to the level of international standards.
One thing that really broke my heart afterwards is a number of people outside of Lebanon said to me, "What did you expect going to Lebanon?" And I think that is such a wrong attitude, because the people in Lebanon, I found amongst the most beautiful people I've ever met. They took in my son and they treated him like family. They loved him dearly. I still have many Lebanese friends checking in on me all the time. Even though their homes were destroyed after the blast, they came to the hospital to see us. They looked after us. They're beautiful people. And for the world to look at them and just say, "What do you expect? That's Lebanon," is so incredibly wrong. And we have to change that attitude, because the Lebanese people deserve better.
Please do not forget our case, and please continue supporting us and help us to reach justice. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Nothing will ease our pain, and our children cannot be revived back. But at least, I mean, to feel justice, to feel that, I mean, it's not over, just like that.
I would urge you all to help us in being as creative as we need in finding the right strategies for us to gain justice.
Thank you so much on behalf of Legal Action Worldwide and our co-host Human Rights Watch.